thought it'd be a little more fun and engaging to have a live audience and to record the podcast segment for the podcast and have you all involved. So welcome and thanks for being here today. Glad you could watch, whether you're watching on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, or here on Crowdcast, which is where we're streaming from. We appreciate you being here. So what I actually want to do here is I'm going to start this off in a second. I'm just going to cut into what's going to ultimately be used for the podcast. So I'll do sort of a little quick intro here in a second, but I just wanted to set the backdrop or give you some behind the scene info on what's happening here before we get started. But as we get started, right before we get started here, and I introduce Stuart, and we get into some of the questions, I also encourage you to please submit any questions you have in the chat box, if you're on LinkedIn or YouTube. I'm watching that here as we're talking, so I'll watch both locations for any sort of comments or questions. If you're here on Crowdcast, where we're broadcasting from, I'll be watching there as well for any questions. So I've got a list of questions I'll start with, but we'd love to get the audience involved too, and that'll make it for a more engaging interview. So with that being said, I'll take a pause for just a second here. I'm going to jump right into the intro, and we'll go from there. So welcome to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I am here with Stuart Robb. Stuart, thanks for being here today.
It's good to be with you, Eric.
So maybe just real quickly, we're going to dive into some questions here in a second I want to talk about transformation best practices in general. So this is meant to be a sort of a 20,000-foot strategic view of transformation, digital transformation. It might be a little bit difficult to distill 25 plus years of your experience into, some of these best practices and lessons that you have, but we'll take a stab here at it. And, but before we do that, maybe just give us a quick introduction. Where did you come from? How did you grow up in the space?
Yeah. Well, I started in IT in 1984. So I think that well over 30 years, maybe even getting up towards 35. And so I started an IBM mainframe, which is what I call proper computing. And it wasn't until about 1997, 98, where I really started getting involved in ERP and CRM. That was with Addison Consulting, as was before they turned themselves into Accenture. And I did a few years stints in various consulting firms. I went on to Ernst & Young as a executive consultant in ERP. And then on to Capgemini in Australia, where I was leading their transformation consulting practice. So I've been doing ERP since about 97, 98. So I guess that's about 25 years. And what's interesting as well is that, I've worked with a lot of the tier one firms, and the methodologies that they use are actually quite similar. They come in and they'll all say they've got these great methodologies, but actually when you cut it right down, you find that a lot of these methodologies are actually quite common, and they're really common sense as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I want to get to that here in a few minutes and talking about some of the trends we're seeing with system integrators in general, but maybe just to give us a sort of a starting point flyover view of the digital transformation space. What are some of the big trends you're seeing in the space here, especially in more recent years? I know a lot has changed in 25 years. You and I started around the same time in this industry. But just in more recent years, what are some of the biggest summary of trends that you're seeing?
Certainly, obviously COVID has been an interesting time. It's almost put a pause and a break on the essence of digital transformation. It's what I call a cyclic business. So every firm will go through a transformation or a digital refresh, usually upon a 10 or 15 year cycle. Now, the ones that don't, the ones that have 30 or 40-year-old systems tend to be the outliers. So you'll get a system that, is SAP, ECC5, or maybe it's still R3, and the company will have decided that it is time that it needs to be refreshed. The technology just can't support what the business needs to do. It can't support that level of automation. And so it'll be time for a change. And so what you see is that there's almost, the same names come up over and over again. So a great example of that is HP, who did a massive SAP project in 2003, 2004. They had some fairly major problems with that, but managed to get it in the end. And then they did it again in 2017 as they started to split HP up. And again, they had some problems. So you see these kind of companies, they come up on a recurring basis. Now, what happened in COVID was that all slowed down. So the number of companies surfacing say we're going to make this big investment in a technology refresh. Those big projects, we saw a slowdown in them, but actually now it's starting to come back, and we're starting to see some larger companies again saying, it's time to update, it's time to refresh, it's time to improve. And if you think about it, that's common sense, because over the course of 10 or 15 years, your processes are going to stagnate. People are going to become institutionalized. Bad ways of working are going to become embedded, and data is going to get less and less clean. So having the proverbial 15-year spring clean on your technology and making use of best practice is a pretty sensible thing to do.
Right. Now, what about technology trends for these companies that are going through the cycle every 10, 15 years? A lot changes technologically in that amount of time. In more recent years, and with our current clients, both in the UK office where you're based, in North America and other parts of the world that we have a client base, what are some of the big, the more recent technological trends that people should be aware of as they enter their digital transformations?
I think, obviously we're seeing a big rise in the use of chatbots on websites. You can always argue whether these are really, modern technology, because a chatbot is basically just a database of questions that it's managed to accumulate where it happens to have got the right answer. And so that goes into the database. But certainly language, neural networks for natural language processing helps those chatbots make intelligent sense of questions that you ask. So that's quite a modern trend. We're seeing stuff in predictive analytics as well. So airlines are starting to use predictive analytics to preempt maintenance on aircraft, particularly engines. So Rolls-Royce are making big strides going from preventative maintenance to predictive maintenance. And of course, then in the ERP space, certainly in AP, OCR has been around donkey's years, but it's really only in the last few years that you can really make it work and actually use OCR to do three-way matching of invoices. And then in accounts receivable, again, predictive analytics to say who's likely to be a bad payer and what can you do to prevent that. Those technologies are now surfacing and starting to get into client footprints.
Right. Yep. And then when you look at predictive analytics and artificial intelligence, it made me think of robotic process automation. That's another technology that seems to be being baked into enterprise technology providers like SAP and Oracle and those guys. How have you seen some of the things you just mentioned, as well as AI or robotics? How is that in reality being integrated into modern enterprise technology? Is it sort of a pipe dream that will happen someday, or do you see our clients actually using that technology now?
There are instances of RPA. RPA is just a super word for screen scraping, which we used to use in the 90s. So it's not as fantastically super duper as I think everybody might suppose it is. It's just a fancy word for being able to manipulate an old system, using a tool that can figure out what that system is and process a transaction. The interesting thing about RPA is it's not nearly as ubiquitous actually as some of the AI systems that we've talked about. A lot of organizations are using OCR technology for invoices, are using chatbots, as I mentioned, and other stuff. But really, RPA to some extent is a problem that's is a solution that's still looking for a problem to solve. And when I talk to clients, they're not really saying, I think what we need is an RPA tool to, uplift our capability on this ERP, they still say, I need to get rid of this ERP. I need a complete refresh. I need to sort the data out. I need to get the processes right. And they'll still think of the $100 million+ ERP project rather than the 10 million or 5 million RPA project.
Right. Yeah. And that's a common dynamic that seems to be there, where you have companies that just, two things. They want to, first of all, just replace their old system because they have to in many cases. But also, so many organizations don't necessarily need or want to swing for the fences to go for the really big emerging technologies. They just want to make some incremental improvements to get there. Now the question is, can you do that in a way that's not overly cost prohibitive and still gives you an ROI? That's the big
it's interesting. One of our clients, in fact, some multinational clients, US and UK based, they brought us in about 3 years ago to do a finance transformation, and the whole essence of their finance transformation was to replace their ERP, an old version of Epicor, get rid of it, put a new one in, and everything in our garden would be rosy. And the problem was that actually when we started analyzing what pain points they were having and where all their issues were, almost none of them were related to a functional deficit in their ERP. Nearly all of them were either upstream data problems or poor process. And so, the whole tenet of their transformation was founded on the fact that this new ERP was going to solve all their problems. But actually, there was a huge landscape of change that they could do before they even worried about their technology. And in fact, the smart play there was to clean the data landscape, was to to improve the process landscape, was to upskill the people, and then do the technology last. And in fact, that's what they've done. And even to the extent that they haven't actually bothered replacing the core ERP, because there's no business benefit that comes from a system that adds up and takes away numbers and produces a set of financial accounts. That's, very, very uninteresting. And so what they've really spent their effort is in the boundary systems. And as I said, they've used products like High Radius to massively improve their accounts receivable and day sales outstanding. They're using Proactis to deliver improvements in accounts payable, so vendor self-service and things like that. And so they're really targeting their transformation and their technology uplift on those places that are really going to give them high benefit. And not every company will do that. Some will just say, let's clear it out, get rid of the whole lot, start again. But this company's really taken the transformation as what it probably ought to be, which is a pure business transformation that thinks about the whole ecosystem, people, process, technology, data, information security, that whole thing. And they're saying, how do we optimize across all of those dimensions, not how do we replace some technology and hope we get a bit of spin-off benefit in terms of improved processes and self-service reporting.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So maybe shifting gears a little bit, and we've talked about emerging technologies and sort of where enterprise technology is headed, and that sort of utopia of great new technologies. In some cases, in other cases, it's just the same technology with better names than we've seen in the past. Which there's a lot of repackaging of the same stuff that tends to happen in this space.
Yeah.
But in general, maybe moving away from those trends a little bit and just talking more specifically about the actual transformations themselves. How would you summarize, and I know this is a very tough question to summarize, but how would you summarize some of the most important keys to digital transformations if someone were just starting out or is in the midst of a transformation right now, thinking about transformation? What are some of those things they need to be aware of, just make sure they focus on these 3 or 5 things or whatever it is? Yeah,
I was going to say, how long have you got? Because we could speak about that probably for the next 48 hours. This could become the world's longest podcast. It's funny you said about repackaging. I mean, I always loved the idea that we've got this real good cloud computing, inverted commas, whereas 10 years ago, 20 years ago, they call it application service provider. And, 15 years ago, it was distributed computing. And then 30 years ago, it was mainframes. And so the same terminology, the terminology changes, but the same core basic techniques are the same. You know, in a mainframe, I had all my applications running in a machine at the center, and I had a screen access, you know, sat in front of me accessing a mainframe. Well, now I'm on the internet and I'm using a screen accessing the internet, and I'm logging on to applications that are hosted in a data center. So everything that comes around is never new. It's just the same thing repackaged with slightly better graphics in my view, but there you go. Important keys to digital transformation success. I think the answer to that is, if you're starting it, it's easier to start it right and keep going than it is to start it wrong and then try and fix it. That's the first thing. So anything that you do when you are launching a transformation, you really need to have either really good advisors or really good research, you know, and see what the common failings are. I would say the best things that you can do at the beginning are be very clear about what your vision is for your transformation and what it encompasses. So what is the scope and what is the outcome going to be? Very clear, crisp answer to what the outcome of the transformation is going to look like. The second thing is that a lot of people leap straight from there to going, well, how do I replace my ERP? Or how do I replace my HCM platform? Or how do I replace my CRM? And actually, it's much more effective to break your business problem down and to start looking at areas where you can improve from a business perspective, and then create a series of projects or initiatives and prioritize those as things you should go and do. Now, it might be that some of those are technology, but it might be that some of those have got nothing to do with technology. They've got, you know, they're operational changes and changes in the org or training or whatever they are. But too many organizations take the big step going straight from, you know, we want to improve our business and we want to improve our cost to serve and we want to, you know, increase our automation in our business. And all of a sudden, the next thing they're doing is talking to, you know, Deloitte or Accenture or somebody saying, how do we do this? And they miss out all that target operating model and value proposition and initiative prioritization and all the other stuff that they should do first. And, you know, clients have a tendency to do that. They get into the RFP, and then when they start to talk to the SI will say to them, well, hang on a minute, have you done this, 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 and this, and this? And they'll go, well, no. And so then they'll have to do a huge, big reverse gear to try to get back to the point at which, you know, they should have come out of that vision stage really being clear. And of course, they've gone through this huge procurement. They've decided on Oracle, or they've decided on Salesforce, or they've decided on this technology. And now the SI is saying, well, what are you going to do with it? And it's all very, you know, well, here's our 7,000 requirements. No, we don't mean that. What's going to be better? What's the outcome? And, you know, so there's ways of doing that, and so if you can get that right, that's going to really, really help you. So do the steps in the right order. The second thing is make sure that you have a partner or an advisor or a contractor, I don't really care who it is, but who really, really knows how to do this stuff and really solid. Because most organizations think they can do this, but even when you've been part of a project team that has done the ERPs or transformations before, there's a very, very different skill set to running one of these than there is to being part of it. And we find organizations that get lost quite early in the process because, you know, they've seen the swan or the duck gliding along the top of the water, but they haven't seen what paddling goes on underneath to make that a smooth process. And so, you know, there are actually not a huge pool of people in the world who really know how to do these transformations effectively, and quite a lot of them are soaked up by the tier one consulting firms anyway. So, you know, you really have to select your support if you want to be effective. And I think too many organizations realize they don't have the knowledge, but get too far down the road. And then again, have to do a lot of reverse gearing. So you asked for 5. I would say if I was going to give you the top 2, those would probably be the absolute flashing neon signs.
Yeah. And those are good ones that actually, if you do those couple things right, that actually leads to a bunch of other things that will probably fall into place more likely than if you hadn't focused on these 2 things. One thing that you mentioned that I just want to build on a little bit is the first point you made around the planning and just making sure you have a clear vision of what you want out of the project and how you're going to get there. It reminds me of an interview we did on this podcast with James Hayward, who I know you know very well. He's the CFO of a client of ours in the UK that you've worked very closely with. And one of the comments he made in that interview, we were talking about a project that I believe was I can't remember if it was either 12 or 18 months. It was a round number like that.
Yes, 12 months.
12 months. And I was asking him, he was talking about the importance of planning. And I asked him, how much of that 12 months did you spend on planning versus the actual execution of the transformation? And he said it was well over half. I mean, he was saying it was well over half that time was spent planning, preparing, getting the blueprint.
And planning never stops, right? Like the business case never stops, because if you're going to create a plan, then as you move through the plan, things are going to change, more things are going to manifest themselves. You're going to get knocked off course, by prevailing winds. And so you have to continually keep on top of the plan and make sure that you're always sailing towards towards Southampton and not going to end up in the Gibraltar or some, place like or southern Spain or something. I think there's a temptation to have a plan and think that is the plan and hold on to that plan, even when it's absolutely patently self-evident that the plan is dead and it's not going to get delivered. And so being more adaptive and more agile and say, okay, well, this has happened. We now know this, what does that do to us? And how do we steer back towards where we were aiming for? It's just a good discipline. And again, it's one that organizations, I don't think, do terribly well. And the second aspect on planning as well is around planning at the right level. Again, I go into too many organizations, the same organizations that tend to deliver up 7,000 requirements for an ERP, of which 6,900 are the same as every other organization, also tend to overplan. So what they will do is that rather than allowing the people that they hold accountable to deliver parts of the project and to run their own plan, they will create these super complex master plans. The worst one I ever saw was 25,000 lines in a Microsoft project plan using enterprise project. And it was useless. I mean, nobody bought into it. Nobody really understood it. When something changed over here, it would change that over there. Nobody understood how or why. And it took months to build this thing, and it was an absolute monster. And within, I would say, probably about 3 months, the thing was absolutely useless. Completely out of date. Nobody was keeping up to date. And so we, again, advocate very strongly. You have a mid-level plan that as a program manager, you can visualize and see what's going on without having to get right into the weeds. So we think you can hold about 150 odd work packages in your head, in a visualization at any one time, and react to those. So plan to try to get to a point at which your granularity is about 150 active activities. Yeah, because if you're trying to manage 4,000 active activities, you're just going to fail.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's that balance between focus and, having the amount of focus you need, but at the same time addressing the complete business problem or the business needs, and knowing that you're not going to boil the ocean overnight. You're not going to solve the world's problems overnight. That's a key balancing challenge that a lot of organizations seem to have.
I think as well, to be honest, as a program manager, you're one person and you're carrying the execution and the delivery, on your shoulders. And And if you're going to try and micromanage every work stream and every work package, you're going to fail. You're lining yourself up to fail before you start. So actually, the way to manage a program, particularly if it's a large transformation, is to not do that. It's to try and lead. Yeah. So as long as your feedback loop is, are you on your plan, Mr. Accountable Person? Yes or no? And if the answer is no, what is that issue or risk that's impacting you, and what can we do about it? Is a much better conversation to have than to be saying, on line number 6,922, you were supposed to deliver it by this date, but you actually delivered it by that day, is a value-free conversation. And so, again, I find particularly those who are newer into ERP program management, they tend to take their project management hat and try and expand it up, rather than changing their style and becoming much more of the leader and much more support and direction, rather than task management and micromanagement.
Right. Yeah. And it seems like too, one of the other phenomena that we see with a lot of clients in the spirit of talking about that planning and kind of focusing in on this planning thread that we're on right now, is when a client first decides what their new technology is going to be, and they've made a decision that, yes, we're going to implement whatever the solution is. There's a certain amount of momentum you have in the project. People are excited. Usually that's about as good as momentum gets, unfortunately, in the whole project, is when you make that decision that, yes, we're going to do it. We got approval. Now we're moving forward. It's all, I hate to say it's all downhill from there, but that's the peak of excitement. And then you add to the fact that your vendor and your system integrator is typically pressuring you to say, hey, you're excited. We're all excited. Let's get going. And then they throw a bunch of resources at it. And suddenly, you wake up the next day, you've got dozens of consultants potentially there on the meter ready to help you out, but you're not ready. You haven't gotten your own ducks in a row and done the planning. You haven't defined what you want to be when you grow up, but yet you're paying by the hour now with those resources.
Yeah. And that's really common. I think I wrote a blog on this a couple of years ago about being ready with your homework before you do the exam. And it's precisely that. I'm really quite firm with clients that there are some prerequisites that they have to have in place before they you can tell the SI their preferred vendor, and you can tell them that, we're going to enter into terms with you and blah, 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 blah. But what you don't want is a, dozen consultants sitting there waiting to start, and you've got no team. And the team that you have got have just joined, and they don't know what it's all about, and they don't know what their role is. You are far better putting all of the pieces of your jigsaw in place first, so that the people on the team know what they're supposed to be doing. They know what the program's all about. They know how you've got to where you are before you get the SI on board, and then they're ready to start having workshops and doing whatever, and you're prepared. And, as you say, a lot of time and money, particularly in the early parts of design, are wasted because the SI is ready to go and the client team isn't. Actually, it's a big lesson, is that it's quite common that any SI or any, in fact, consulting firm is almost always able to go faster than the client. And the reason for that is because the consultant or the SI's pure focus is on the program, whereas you get matrix management, matrix resources, you get resources that come on, don't know what they're doing, you get resources that come on and then roll off again. There's that churn where you don't get that continuity of knowledge, you don't necessarily get first go right in terms of skills, they don't come along with the collateral. Again, there's simple things. The number of times that I say, do not go into design and implementation before you've got your SKU model sorted out, before you really documented your price book, because the SI will sit there and say, can you tell me what your price book looks like and what your discounting model is? And they won't have it because nobody's looked at it for 10 years and it's not written down. And so they will spend 3 weeks, 4 weeks writing the SKU model or writing the price book while the SI is sitting there waiting, charging for them. And those are easy things to to sort out without the benefit of £50,000 a week going out the front door to, to the likes of the tier one SIs.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's super easy to be lulled into thinking that in order for us to meet an aggressive timeline and an aggressive budget, we need to get going now. So there's a temptation to say, well, if we do what Stuart says, which is to plan and to define our processes up front, then we're going to slow things down and we're not going to meet our timeline. But the reality is that helps you speed up. And that's something James talked quite a bit about, is how fast the project was able to go once they had that solid plan in place. So I think that's one thing that a lot of organizations miss out on.
Yeah, I think as the other thing as well is, the SI's role in life is to generate fees and profits for the partners, right? And so the SI will be keen to get as many warm bodies onto the client site or charging the client billable time as they possibly can. And actually, in some circumstances, 80% of those people are not going to add any value for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 10 weeks. So you are better throttling and managing the SI so that you're getting the A-team leadership, experts to structure the program properly through a mobilization and then early parts of design, and then getting people on later, where you're getting into more detail. The same is true of decision making. Again, the temptation in an ERP is to want a decision, to need a decision, therefore to make a rapid decision. Now, actually, if you built your plan around that, what you'll do is almost certainly make lots of bad decisions. And what happens is that as you get into build and test, particularly when you get into UAT, all those bad decisions will come back to haunt you. So what you really need is, for those key decisions, you need sufficient time to acquire a reasonable data set on which to base a decision, and then a reasonable amount of time, at least a day or two, to reflect on it and to coalesce your thinking before you make it. And too often you'll sit in a meeting and over and over again, we need a decision on whether we're going to use this integration or not. And they'll go, because it's going to take this long to build and we're recommending de-scoping it. And you say, if you're any good, well, what happens if we de-scope it? Oh, nothing, it'll be fine. And then 6 months later, you find you've de-scoped it, and all of a sudden half your reporting suite doesn't work because you just haven't done that piece of work properly. You haven't thought it through. You've made the decision in a rush because the program is held up whilst that decision is being made. But then all it does is add time later on because you've gambled red when the colors come up black.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, it's a good way to look at it. And, it's even worse, I think, is that, or at least just as bad as what you just described, is the other option, which is we'll just let our system integrator or the software determine for us how that a certain process is going to look. And then you end up.
Yeah. I think the other thing that's that if I wanted to characterize a key success factor in these, and it's something that I've always been really lucky with, is surrounding yourself with good people and people that you trust to be able to take the accountability and to make decisions and to make informed decisions and to run their part of the program without you having to constantly intervene or them constantly coming to you. The most successful programs that I've been on, I've often felt sometimes actually I don't need to be there because they're all just getting on with it and they're all really focused. And I'm just sitting there doing the status meeting and orchestrating, conducting the orchestra a bit, but everybody knows their instrument, everybody's playing beautifully, and that's fantastic. And so if you can create that team, your likelihood of success goes up considerably. And I think what also happens is a lot of organizations disaggregate their accountability to the SI. And unless you are closely managing the SI, you're not going to know what the SI is doing, and you're not even necessarily going to know what assumptions or decisions they're making. And so, again, it's very easy to lose control. It's very easy to lose the picture on these programs. And that's why, it was funny. I was having a conversation today. I was saying, I do tend to rehire people I've worked with before. And the reason I rehire people I've worked with before is because I know them. They know how I think. They have worked with me previously, and they've clearly been successful at what they do. And so why wouldn't I rehire them? Because, they've already proven themselves in what they do. And I know that, may not be the most politically correct thing that we're supposed to say these days. Everyone has an equal chance. But the truth of the matter is that if you're putting people on it and you don't know them and you find out that they're not capable of doing the job, then you're going to waste time, you're going to waste money, you're going to waste DSI's time and money. And really your sole objective in delivering these transformations should be to maximize your chances of success. So whatever tactic or technique you have to do, whether it's, tight vendor management, whether it's good recruitment, whether it's selecting the right team members from internal, ring fencing people that you want, not sharing them, all of that stuff, each little, success attribute that you put onto a program will increase your chances of success and make you more likely to come out of it as the hero rather than the goat, as Charlie Brown used to call it. I think you're on mute, Eric.
Rookie mistake. My dog was barking, and I was trying to make sure that it wasn't disruptive to your good response there. So we had a question that I wanted to that came in through LinkedIn while we've been talking here that I want to cover, and this is from Krishnan Kaushik, and he's asked, "Don't you think that the cycle of tech transformation or digital disruption is getting reduced with each passing decade? With current trend, it looks like highly competitive markets will have to go through multiple transformation efforts in consecutive years. If this happens, then how can a company manage transformation initiatives and help their employees adopt technology without any confusion?" So I think getting back to the human side of things, along combined with the rapid pace of constant change. So how do you balance that?
Yeah, I think that I think that's true to a certain extent. In other respects, I think it's a misnomer, and I think it's a misnomer because the technology companies will be pushing you and wanting you to recycle and refresh because they'll get more money out of you. I mean, it's quite simple. And the SIs will love you because you're constantly refreshing. As I said before, if I take a very cold, hard look, an accounting package adds up and it takes away. And even if I compare an accounting package from 1980, a COBOL one, to one from 2015 or 16, they're not doing anything substantially different. Now, you might disagree with me, and I'll tell you a little story, which was I had my daughter around at a couple of weekends ago, and she's about 12, and she's doing computer studies at school, and she was raving on about all the latest tech. And I said, if you strip away all of the surrounding graphics and excitement, we're doing the same thing that we did 30 years ago. And to prove it, I went onto QuickBooks and I created an invoice, and they had the VAT number and the address and and on all the rest of it, the line item and the item code and what have you. And I created it, and I was able to save the invoice, and I was able to send it to the dummy company that I had set up. And there you go. It was in my QuickBooks. It was in my database. That's it. Thank you very much. And then I went over to my very old Apple II, and in BASIC, I wrote a little program that would capture the company name, the company address, the VAT number, etc., and it would save it to a floppy disk drive as a text file. and I could retrieve the text message and I could put it on the screen, and there it was. And it was no different to QuickBooks. Now, okay, it wasn't as sexy, and it didn't have, you couldn't, use drop-down lists and things like that. Although I suspect if I'd been minded enough, I could have worked out a way to program drop-down lists in BASIC. Probably not be the best use of my time, but philosophically, it was doing the same thing.
Right.
Now, what it couldn't do was it couldn't draw nice graphs showing me what my sales per quarter were or my sales per month, and it couldn't do, my percentage revenue of France versus UK or anything like that, because that part of the technology has moved on. But the core of an ERP or accounting system hasn't. And actually, those do not give you any business benefit at all. A core accounting package, whether it's SAP or Oracle or NetSuite or QuickBooks or, my little basic program that I wrote, gives you no competitive advantage. Okay, the stuff that does give you competitive advantages is the higher level layers. So it's the things like the sales order processing and order management stuff and the fulfillment stuff, the manufacturing processes and the materials management and purchasing management. It is the accounts receivable automation and AI. And actually, the business case for replacing a core ERP is actually pretty weak. If your sole objective is to replace your accounting package with a new one, then the only reason you've really got to fall back on is technological obsolescence. It's so old that the vendor's not going to support it and it's going to fall apart. In order to get real benefit, it has to be the peripheral applications, the boundary layer applications, and they're going to change all the time. And that is just part of the normal process of life. So that's why I say, in answer to the question, the number of companies that will replace a core ERP with all of the disruption that comes with is never going to be every 2 years. I mean, Vodafone, O2, GlaxoSmithKline, whoever they are, whether they're on Oracle, Sainsbury's, Tesco's, whether they're on Oracle or SAP, they're not every 2 years going to be going, well, actually, I've decided I don't really like SAP. I'm going to take it out and I'm going to put Oracle in. That doesn't happen. What they're going to do is to say, actually, we've got this new product or service that we're going to offer. And within the core of our Oracle or SAP platform, it doesn't do exactly what we want. So we're going to buy this additional piece of technology that does do what we want, some kind of customer experience portal, whatever the thing is, and they'll bolt it on the side. Now, in 10 years' time, SAP and Oracle might offer that as part of their standard product. But, let's be honest, NetSuite and Microsoft Dynamics still do not have any native capability to OCR an invoice. You have to go and buy a separate product from the App Store. So, the idea that the core enterprise operating system, the enterprise engine, needs regularly replacing, I think is not correct. But I do agree that the peripheral will always change, and that is just the normal business as usual, the stuff that enterprises will go through.
Right. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. Here's another question that's interesting. Actually, we got a couple here. I'm going to choose one. Let me go back to this one.
I'll give shorter answers if we're getting a lot.
Yeah, they're starting to roll in here.
Okay.
So the question I wanted to get to here is, where is it? Bear with me. Can Stuart please advise on best practices to develop a business case for a replacement or upgrade of an ERP system?
Yeah, I can. That's a very long subject. We should do a podcast on this on its own, but I can give you some pointers. First of all, building a business case bottom up is quite a lot harder than building a business case top down. One of the first places I start with business cases is to look at what the key drivers of the business are and what data we have available to look at those key drivers. So let's take an example. Let's say that we are the goal of the program is to improve finance efficiency. So the first place, which is a really easy long division, is to say, well, what's our total revenue and what's finance's cost to serve as a percentage of total revenue. Now you can look that up on averages by industry on the APQC, and that will give you a benchmark. So the average benchmark for all companies is about 2%. So if you do your calculation, and it's a very simple calculation that you can do just by looking at the annual accounts, you can divide it, the finance cost by the revenue. And if you're at 3% or 4%, you know you have got 1% to play with. And you know that because every other company can make it do with 2%. So there's got to be a reason why you're more. And that then allows you to start drilling down to the next level to say, okay, well, where's that cost leakage? It's usually in headcount, right? Let's be honest. That's where most companies spend, particularly in back office functions. So if you're looking at headcount, you can say, okay, well, how much is my AP costing me? So what is it, if I do some division, what's my cost per invoice processed or my cost to vendor setup compared to the industry average? And again, that gives you somewhere to go that starts to give you comparators that say, we are not efficient and this is how efficient we should be. And therefore that block of money is available. And so that should be the aim and target of our business case. And then you can build the future state operating model that underpins that financial objective. Now, that's an easier way than trying to say, well, maybe we can shave a head over here and maybe we can shave another head over there. You know, that's quite a difficult, or maybe we can shave, you know, maybe this person can spend a bit more time doing this and a bit less time doing that. That's quite a difficult way to build up a business case. And actually, usually it's not credible either. Usually people will go into that micro level detail, they'll pull it to pieces and say this business case is rubbish. Whereas if you're doing it from a benchmark perspective, that becomes infinitely more powerful because you've got the answer. This is what everybody else does. We're not doing it. There you go. There's the profit we're leaving on the table.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think a couple of things you point out that are super important. One is that, you know, the need to look at benchmarks and look at, you know, reliable agnostic benchmarks. It's easy to go to, you know, SAP or Oracle or Microsoft and ask them, how much money am I going to save if I deploy your technology? And they're going to give you a big magic number that you probably don't want to hang your hat on, or certainly you don't want to bet your career on. And that's one thing. The other thing too, that I think maybe just backing up even more, is I think the fact that we're talking about a business case is important, because a lot of times, even now, especially now, and the way the industry is going and the way so many organizations are being forced into changing their technology, they neglect the whole business case because they say, well, I don't have a choice because SAP is making me upgrade to S/4HANA, or Oracle's making me upgrade to Oracle Cloud or whatever. So even if you are being forced, or you feel like you have no other choice and there is nothing really to justify, you still want to have that business case, right? From a
you need to know what you're in for, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't go to your bank manager and say, can I have £100,000 loan? And then he'll go, why? And goes, oh, well, because car's getting a bit old. I mean, you're going to need something a bit more than that, you know, to get him to shell out 100 grand. And it's the same with a business case. You need some, you know, good paperwork behind it. Otherwise it's just sunk money. Yeah,
absolutely. Agreed. Now, here's a question that's quite a bit different than what we've been talking about so far, but I think it'll be relevant to a lot of our audience, particularly those that might be in consulting or interested in consulting. And this question is, hello, sir, can you talk about the growth of a functional consultant? So maybe just talk, I know that's a very broad question, but maybe you can hone in on just maybe as a consultant in general, you know, what does a career path look like? And I don't know if you want to tie it back to your career path or what you've seen our own team develop.
I mean, my career path was probably a little bit unusual from consultancy because I didn't come in as a consultant into a firm and start from scratch. I actually came in as an associate partner because I'd already run a company. I was already so I was subsumed into Ernst & Young. And so probably my experience isn't terribly useful, but you know, if you're going to grow in consulting, there are two attributes you need. Firstly, you need to be expert at what you do, and you need to really be solid and confident, and to some extent assertive as well, to make sure that you're making a positive contribution, but that the clients that you're talking to can rely on you and trust you and want to work with you. The second thing that you need to do in consulting is, if you're going to be effective, you need to be able to communicate with people, and you need to be able to build a rapport with people. So you'll generate, as you get more senior and as you do it longer, you'll get more gravitas, and as you get more seniority, you'll get more gravitas and you'll get more charisma in the role. But that's something you have to proactively build. Now, there are all sorts of, there are hundreds and hundreds of things that will help you do that. Barbara Minto on the pyramid principle around how to communicate with senior execs, that's 101 consulting. There are some good videos actually on YouTube by a guy, one from an ex-McKinsey consultant, and even I watch it because I actually think some of the stuff he has to say is actually quite interesting. And then the third thing is, and unfortunately this is the thing that a lot of people struggle most with, is that you have to know how to understand a problem from a client and come up with a proposition that will solve that problem, and then be able to sell it. And a lot of people don't think that consultants are salesmen, and if you are a partner in a consulting firm, you are absolutely a salesman. And so again, a good background in negotiating techniques, contracts, anything that you can do in your consulting career that can get you out of your box and supporting something that is a little bit left field. Though if you can get yourself onto a bid team, if you can help work with the negotiation team, whatever it is that builds your width of experience will make you more attractive as you move up the seniority grades.
Right.
That gave a few insights there.
Yeah. And a follow-up question actually from a different person who, so obviously this topic is of interest to a few people on the recording here today, but the question is, how do you balance specialization with being useful starting out?
You be useful. Absolutely. If a friend of mine's daughter has actually just joined PwC as an actuary, and she was getting quite frustrated that she was being asked to make the coffee for the partner and what have you. And I said, no, that's a good thing. You're getting into the partner's office, you're communicating with the partner, he'll be imparting pearls of wisdom, things that he happens to be doing. He'll be giving you work directly rather than going through all of the layers. Trust me, that's the best thing you could be doing. And so, the specialization is important, but it's the well-rounded consultant that's going to go up the quickest. So the more you can get involved with, the more you show that you're proactive, you're keen, but not grasping and desperate. You still have to be part of the team. But partners want somebody that they can rely on. They want, again, like the client, they want somebody that they can trust, they can give something to, they know it's going to be done, it'll be done right first time. You won't do everything right first time. You'll make a few missteps. I've made a few horrendous howlers in my career. Sent the whole margin spreadsheet to the client once, which I thought was going to get me sacked, and as it happened, the margin wasn't in it. But that was a kind of disasters that will befall you. But the firms will tolerate that, because if in the whole you are a go-to individual, because you've that width and depth of skills and experience, and you get on with everyone. That's what they want, and that's how the best people and the people who go fastest up the chain are the ones that are the best networkers.
Right. Yeah, that's sound advice. And I think that's a challenge too with being in consulting. I think it's always a challenge between not only specialization versus being useful, which don't necessarily obviously need to be two different things, but there's also the whole balance of specialization versus breadth. And I think the challenge with what we do as consultants, especially in the transformation space, is that you need to have some specialty, but you also have to be able to see the big picture, or else you get, you're not nearly as.
There's another more immediate consideration, which is a mantra that I've always used, which is everything that I've ever learned, I know is going to go out of date in about 5 or 10 years. So I can program in BASIC, I can program in COBOL. If I had to, I can run a sysgen on an IBM mainframe. And that skill set to me at the moment is absolutely no use whatsoever, but I can still do it. So, I have reinvented myself approximately every 5 years for my entire career. Now, as you get older, it gets much harder to keep reinventing yourself technically, because you just don't have the brain capacity that you had when you were 20 to start learning about non-fungible tokens and, Bitcoin programming and Python, cryptography. You can't do that because you get older. So you make a transition from knowledge and skill into slightly more esoteric, client relationship management and program directorship and things like that, which rely more on your people skills than your technical skills. But nonetheless, yes, absolutely, you've got to be a good all-rounder, but you have to be known for something. Yeah, it's no good being a consultant and say, well, what does he do? Oh, he's just here, that's no good. You've got to be known for, you need to speak to him about if you need some help on SAP or whatever it is.
Right. So I guess to wrap up then, and maybe one last question that'll sort of pull all this together and maybe even summarize some other things we haven't gotten to. But what if you had to summarize for someone that is about to start a transformation, either they're an executive on a project team or at an organization about to go through a transformation, or they're a project team member, or maybe they're a consultant that's about to enter the space, what sort of high-level advice would you give to someone that's just getting ready to start out on the journey here?
You should be able to give an elevator pitch on the outcome of the program. And you should be able to do that to anyone at any time, within 10 floors. So you should be able to talk about the program, what its purpose is, what outcome, what benefit, within about 30 to 45 seconds. If you can't do that, you will struggle to be able to relay the big picture to anyone else. And so my strong recommendation, when you are starting, your mission, your vision, your strategic imperatives, all of that stuff is really, really important to crystallize. And the way that I recommend doing that, as well as kind of having that elevator pitch, is to have some form of narrative, some kind of day in the life of, that you can say how it's going to be different to everyone. The board, the chief executive officer, the SI, the tools vendor, the colleague who uses the system on a day-to-day basis, the colleague who uses it ad hoc once every now and again, whoever it is, the client, the customer, whoever it is, have that real clarity in mind as to what it looks like. Because if you can communicate that effectively and everyone can understand it, everyone will get behind it. If you can't, you're finished before you start.
Right. It's great advice. And it gets back to that, sort of vision and clarity and planning. And that seems to be the theme of what we've talked about here today, is the importance of that. So I appreciate that feedback. Well, thank you, Stuart. Thanks for being on the show here today. Really appreciate it. Appreciate everyone listening in here. And we'll look forward to seeing you on the podcast again very soon. And if you want to reach out to Stuart or any of our team in the UK, especially if you're a European-based company or if you have European resources that want to reach out, we'll include your contact information, but they can also connect with you on LinkedIn and other channels, I assume.
Yeah, well, actually, I hate Facebook with a passion you can only just about imagine. So don't look for me there. But I am on LinkedIn. And obviously, you can email me at stuart.robb@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Yep, and we'll include a link to your email address below. And you can also reach out to me as well, and look forward to seeing you all soon. Thanks again, Stuart, for being here.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot now.
Everyone have a great day. Take care.